computer programmed reality. We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Well, good morning, everybody. Little Philip K. Dick there. Remix style, courtesy of yours truly. What's happening? Happy Monday, April 16th, 2018. Sorry for the delay here. Sometimes after that Sunday night show, I don't always rise as early as I would like to. But rise I have. He is risen. So I guess we're going to put together the pieces now, what happened on Friday night, or at least try to. And if you were part of the live stream last night, we looked at it from the astrological perspective. And we're going to do some of that today, but also try to just wrap our heads around everything that took place in the last 72 hours with some added information of things you may or may not know about, but I'd be happy to share them with you because that's what I do. That's why they pay me the big bucks around here. First of all, let's just look at the timing of it. It happened on a Friday night. Friday night. It didn't happen on a Monday. It's like if you want to have a news story or a news event and you want to bury it, when do you do something? You do it on a Friday. So this is pretty consistent with some of the stuff that they've done in the past with making announcements on Friday. Do you remember when they had the memorable pussy tape, the pussy recording with Trump and Billy Bush? When did they release that? They released it on a Friday. And there is a lot of speculation that it was the Trump team that actually released the recording so that they could get on top of it and then bury it sort of in that Saturday, Sunday news cycle. Well, I think that actually might be true, that they knew that the other side had the recording, and so they wanted to control the release of it. But that's just giving you an example of sort of the Friday strategy. We'll just call that the Friday strategy. So now we have the Friday strategy where we're launching a missile attack in Syria. Okay, well, I want to get into the reality / non-reality of that. That's going to be part of what we're going to talk about today. But there's so much that went down on Friday night. First of all, Art Bell died on Friday the 13th. And I couldn't think of a more fitting day for Art Bell to check out. And Art was Art had a huge influence on my life. I mean, to some extent, I'm doing what I'm doing today, or at whatever level this thing is, because of Art Bell. And I remember the first time I heard. I had two kind of memorable moments with Art Bell, and they both involved trips from Washington State to California. So the first time I heard Art Bell was in I guess this must have been 1991. I think it was 91 or 90. It was right at the end of 91, 92. It was like it was just after New Year's. It was just after, so it was the beginning of 1992. So let me locate this in space-time. And I was moving from Washington to California, and this was the night that George H.W. Bush face planted into his food in Japan, which was essentially the clone running out. The clone had expired, and thus the face plant. Or maybe it was the clone with a heroin habit. Maybe that's what it was. But I feel like it was the clone that was expiring at that. I was with my girlfriend at that time, and I've been telling her about the clone stuff, and because I had gone to a seminar with George Green a couple months earlier, and George Green blew the top off my head with the clones and the robotoids and all that stuff. And I'd actually seen this transformation with Bush. The run up to the Gulf War, the guy was on fire. He expanded beyond almost any human I'd ever seen. He was like, you could just tell that guy was on fire. He was living his destiny. He was doing all these things that were prophesied, and seeing himself as some exalted grand poobah. But all the sacrifices, literal and figurative, that he had made prior to that event were all paying off. Everything was lining up. You could see it. And then one day, all of a sudden, he just looked different. He looked different. He acted different. Like, what happened to this guy? And a couple months later, George Green basically set me straight. That guy's a clone. And then we got into the whole clone thing. It was like, wow, that's really fascinating. So we're driving down from Washington to California. I think we're in Oregon right around this point in time. And we get the news that Bush face planted into his meal in Japan. And I was listening to a late night talk show at that time. And it was Art Bell. And Art was a kind of cookie cutter, conservative, late night Rush Limbaugh. That's what Art was for a while. And I'd never heard of him before, but I was driving down, I picked him up on a station, and I listened to him. And so he was doing this narrative about what was going on in Japan and Bush, and distinctive voice. And then that was, it would take me about another 2 years before I'd have another radio contact with Art Bell. And it was a very similar experience. I was traveling down from Washington State and made a stop in Shasta. And from Shasta to Oakland, where I was living, I had tuned into a station. It was a Sunday night. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the first Sunday nights where Art was doing Dreamland. And that was his Sunday night show where he would go off the deep end and have all kinds of crazy guests. And so Art was doing sort of the conservative talk stuff, Monday through Friday. I think he had Saturday night off, and he'd come back on Sunday, and he started to do Dreamland. And in that, or during that drive down from Mount Shasta, he had Preston Nichols on, and Preston was one of the Philadelphia Experiment Montauk guys. And it was the first time I'd had any exposure to Preston Nichols. I'm going to sneeze. Hold on. Sorry about that. All right. The Trinity is out. So I'm getting my mind blown by Preston Nichols. And I think one of the other guys might have been on with him. But, we're talking time travel. I mean, this is, right up my alley. I'm like, I have to find this show again. So what happened with Art is that eventually he dropped the Monday through Friday political stuff. And eventually Dreamland became the foundation for Coast to Coast. And that's when Art really took off, because there were lots of people late at night who couldn't sleep for whatever reason. Their jobs, their wives, their lives, their husbands, whatever. So you had a whole group of people who were having difficulty going to sleep. And then Art was, in some ways, this perfect antidote. He had this perfect audience who were restless, who were in some kind of altered, semi-altered REM state, even though they weren't sleeping. The circadian rhythms are taking you into that REM state, even though you're kind of awake. It was this perfect collision of surreality and dark information and being in this light hypnagogia from the kingdom of Nye, Texas, Nye, Nevada, just down the road from Area 51. And he had, a lot of interesting people. He had John Lear, especially the early days. The early days of Art Bell were this interesting interface between a lot of the older players that were on the ufology circuit, like Stan Friedman and John Lear, and a lot of those characters. And you had Preston Nichols, and you had Philadelphia Experiment guys, your Area 51 guys. And then things began to expand a little bit. I'll never forget the first time I heard David Icke. It was on Art Bell. It was David Icke's first appearance on Art Bell. And I heard David Icke, and it was like I was hearing a part of myself. It's like, well, this guy's been doing the same research I've been doing. And not only that, but, he's uncovered the reptilian piece. I'm like, I want to hear more of this dude. So Art Bell was the guy that kind of broke David Icke. And then Art would go off into the dark gothic stuff sometimes. Like he would talk about that hole that they haven't found the bottom. It was like the entrance to hell. There was definitely a very dark side to Art. And in some ways, that's what made Art fantastic. That's what made him great. Because, he could take you there. He could take you right to the edge and kind of bring you back for the most part. And Art Bell was on fire. I mean, there was a period there from roughly 94 to about 99, 2000. There's about a 6-year period. Let's make it 7 years. So 93 to 2000, where Art was on fire. A lot of people don't remember this, but he had a book called The Quickening that he had written. And it was almost like it was a bestseller. It was all about the events that were taking place and how people were waking up and how history was accelerating. And I think he was even on TV for a while. They had that show, was it Dark Skies, about UFOs. And Art played this kind of dark shadow. He was a terrible actor. Dark, shadowy figure on Dark Skies. Art was on fire. For 7 years, Art the rise of Art Bell was really something to kind of witness. And then everything started to get weird. Everything started to get very strange. You know what's also interesting too is that synonymous with Art Bell was the rise of the X-Files. So you had Art Bell and then the X-Files kind of running this parallel track during the mid-90s. And, you know, if you were into exposure and disclosure, and it was actually a really interesting time to watch these themes get played out for us in the media by Art Bell and Chris Cooper, right? So that was an interesting time. And you have to wonder whether or not, again, that was all part of a, you know, an appendage of the military-industrial complex. You know, were they all just kind of staged? And you often wondered, you know, where art really came from. Because certainly it feels like he was like military intelligence. And we know that George Norrie is. George comes from naval intelligence. And, you know, I've talked about George before in his background. And like when he came out of naval intelligence, so George has, you know, the great voice, the late night voice. And he came out of naval intelligence, and the first thing he did was he became a news director for a TV station in Detroit. And that's exactly what these guys who are in intelligence do. They become news directors, or they become editors of newspapers, editor-in-chief. That's the role that they migrate into, because it's their job to control the information. That they're the control valve at the local level. And newspapers and TV stations and radio stations all across America are filled with people from the intelligence apparatus. That's the way it's always been. Well, not always, but since the OSS and the beginning of the CIA, it's like, let's get these people in place. Let's get them in these positions. Let's get them hired. Because if we need to have somebody shut something down, there they are. Or if we need to have somebody, you know, push a news story in a certain direction, there they are. So George comes out of naval intelligence and gets right into that gig in Detroit. And again, this is my opinion. It's not necessarily a fact, but we put one and one together, we get two. And then he started this security company in Detroit. And you just kind of look at this stuff and go, what's going on here? And then you listen to Coast to Coast Now. And, you know, I mean, the popularity of the program has had to have waned significantly over the years. And I always wondered what the relationship with George and Art was. You know what's interesting about the two of them? They're both Geminis. So I guess if you want to be on radio, it helps to be a Gemini. Well, Art, wherever you are, I hope you are experiencing the depth and the high strange that you brought us on while you were here. But he went into a dark period, didn't he? He had that thing with his son. His son was kidnapped by a teacher down in Pahrump, and then apparently some weird stuff happened between the son and the teacher, and the son got HIV from the the weird, really bizarre. And then he was totally in love with this woman, Ramona. And then she died. And then I think he remarried another. I think Ramona was Filipino. I think he married another Filipino woman. And then there was that weird kind of comeback period, where it was the return of Art Bell. And he was going to be on Sirius, and everybody was psyched. It was like, yeah, great, this is going to be great. Art Bell's back, right? And he just didn't have it. He didn't have it, and he had a weird relationship with Sirius. I don't know what that was about. And he was up and running for about 2 or 3 months, and then he just walked away. And, you know, it's kind of like an allegory for life in general, in a lot of ways. Because once you hit a certain peak or a certain moment, it's very hard to sustain that and to stay on top and to keep doing what you do. It's a very difficult kind of exercise. And it's part of the cycle of life. I mean, life is a wheel. You know, you get up to the top and it's like a Ferris wheel. And you come down again and you get to the bottom and you get to the top. And this is what happens with life. And and we can see this in the astrological chart as well. When you're down at the bottom of the chart, when your sun, or for instance, let's say Saturn is transiting through the bottom of the chart, you know, you're down there at the bottom. You're learning the bottom lessons. And when Saturn begins to rise again, moves to the top of the chart, you're learning the upper lessons of the chart. And for somebody who is like in the media or in the world or out there in the public, the Saturn transit through the bottom of the chart is not always that easy, because you're rooting out and you're mining through those very, very personal places. And I don't know where Saturn was in Art Bell's chart, to be honest with you. Although I did his chart one time. I did not have a birth time, but we know he was a Gemini. Anyway. But then he walked away. When you walk away from something, it's very hard to come back to it. It's very, very difficult. And that's the nature of it. It's very difficult. I remember one time I had a job. I was a mail carrier. And it was a great job. Totally great job. Loved it. And I was fantastic at it. I was in my 20s. And then after sort of a period of sort of tumultuousness, I left the job. And then I came back, and I came back part-time, and I was horrible at it. And it was so bad that they had to let me go. And it was a completely different script. It was a completely different tableau. It was like I couldn't go back. You know, and it was a very strange and difficult lesson for me to learn when I was in my 20s. So, bottom line is like I'm not going to stop doing this. I mean, it's going to keep doing this until the lights go out, whatever that means. Okay, because I don't want to have to stop and then try to come back and, oh, where is everybody? No, this is it. This and the website, what I'm doing is one track into the future. And if I ever do stop doing this, it'll only be if I find something else in the world that matches up whatever it is I can do to help people and make a few dollars off of it before the whole, circus goes up in flames. That much is clear. What's not clear is what happened on Friday night. Besides the death of Art Bell, we had Alex Jones completely melting. I sat here and I watched it. I watched it live. And my jaw dropped. First of all, he was smashed to high heaven. And he had that look of, like, okay, Owen Schroyer was sitting next to him. And Owen Schroyer had that look on his face like somebody who's with somebody else who's really drunk, and they're not. And you know what that's like. You just sit there and you kind of watch this whole spectacle and you go, holy shit. This is what it's like when you're drunk. And then he just became unwound, unglued. And definitely, kind of parting ways with the whole Trump train. And it was pretty significant. And the whole thing started off with this really profane explosion. And then he sort of got it out of the profane, but then he began to melt down. What's really interesting about the whole Alex Jones thing is that you would think that he would have been just a caricature and a complete bozo. And in some ways, he kind of came across like that. But I actually read that there were a number of people who wound up respecting Alex Jones more for not slavishly supporting Trump. So this thing might have worked for him in a weird way. We got a comment here in the chat room. Let's see what we have. I think Art Bell produced Dark Matter Radio with Jimmy Church. That's what Lynn said. Oh, could be. Could be. Maybe that was it. I don't know. But still, it's not what he still wasn't like at the top of his form and sort of being Art Bell in the world. People like this Jimmy Church guy. I've never listened to him. Anyway. So there was Alex Jones just completely melting down. It was interesting because we had two kind of seminal figures in radio. And that's where Alex Jones started off with. He started off in radio. Having these kind of major life moments. I don't know, Art Bell died and maybe Alex Jones's career died. I don't know. We'll have to see what happens with Alex. I'm looking forward to actually watching a bit of his show today. That'll be interesting. All right, so let's get to it. Let's talk about Syria. My first reaction, visceral reaction, was I was not happy about it. For a number of reasons, mostly because I'm sick and tired of the wars in the Middle East. I'm sick and tired of selling arms to the Saudi Arabians. I'm sick and tired of the hypocrisy. And that's the part that really gets me, is the hypocrisy. And that we have some kind of fake gas attack. And I do believe it was a fake gas attack. And we see these kids who supposedly went through this attack, and all of a sudden, everybody's got their panties in arrears, and they want action. They want to take action. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? We cannot condone these actions. We cannot say this in any more definitive language. Bashar al-Assad must feel the same kind of pain and suffering that he's inflicted upon others so that he'll never do. I mean, you know the story. You know the script. High school students can write these speeches. They're ridiculous. So let's go get them. Let's crank up the volume for the war machine. And I'm tired of the spin and repeat and rinse cycle, rinse, repeat, spin all over again. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. Who is tired of it? Well, let's just get the hell out of there. I mean, so part of me is, it's at that level. It's like, you know. And then there is the potential of, okay, well, where's this going to go? Where's this going to go? Are the Russians going to get involved? Are they going to get pissy and do a counterstrike? And are they going to wait and do a counterstrike? I mean, there's all kinds of anxiety and the unknowns and, you know, all the stuff that goes along with it in that moment. And trying to keep it together. And trying not to do an Alex Jones. That was really kind of that was at the top of my list on Friday night. And then gather information. That was another important part. Where did the strikes hit? Could we see the strikes? Where did they go? How many missiles? 13 on Friday the 13th hit, because apparently there were 100. And they were older missiles that, you know, needed to be fired off. And, oh, okay, now we see what's going on here. Oh, okay, I get it. Putin knew and Assad knew, and, you know, they found this chemical plant and they fired the missiles at this chemical plant because this was the plant that was making the chemicals that they were using these civilians. Oh, okay. Well, isn't that nice and neat and tidy? But what if there was no chemical attack? Does that same narrative play out? Then apparently this chemical plant belonged to a company called NTI. And NTI is an international company with people like Jerry Brown, Warren Buffett, Ted Turner on the board of directors. Now it's a surgical strike against those guys who are the deep staters. We got one of their stockpiles of gas and all kinds of nerve agents and well, this is the QAnon narrative now. Now we're into that realm. And oh, you anti-Trump people, oh, all you people on the alt-right who are bitching and moaning that this is not the thing to do. He's playing 4D chess and you're just going along with the narrative. And then there's like vitriol. There's total vitriol. If you call out this whole thing, right? If you call out this whole thing and say, oh yeah, we're going to war again, and this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening, and we're not into it, well then you've got the shock troops of QAnon basically shouting you down. And they're becoming almost as bad as the left. With their sense of, indignation and righteousness, like, you're just a mere mortal. You don't see the bigger picture. You don't see the bigger pattern. I'm still waiting. I am still waiting. I'm still waiting for people to get carted off with these indictments, but we'll never see it. We'll never see the indictments. It'll be a military tribunal, and we just don't see those. People will just disappear. Now, I'm not saying that some of this is not happening, but I also have to have a healthy sense of cynicism for the entire thing. Because what happens with me is my brain kicks in. It's like, okay, well, if they knew about that plant for such a long time and then wanted to destroy it, why didn't they just send somebody in there and destroy it? It's easy. It's not that difficult. People infiltrate all the time. And all you would need is 2 or 3 people to infiltrate. We've got people in Syria. You don't think that we have CIA and spies and all kinds of people living in Damascus? Well, you're wrong, because we do. You think it's just Syrians living there? No, there are Americans in Damascus. And there are Americans in the intelligence community in Damascus. Would not be that hard to go in and have one of these, Blackwater type groups just blow that place up without all the fanfare. But I guess they've got to blow up all those old missiles. And I guess they have to make a good show of it for the progressives and the left and all the people that, want war with Russia and are just thirsty for war at the core of their heart. I guess that's another reason. It's all for show. Who knows? I did a chart on it, which I'm going to write about today and put up on the site. We talked about it last night on the show. That event, when it happened, that was a Pisces rising event. Pisces rising, Neptune in the first house, squaring the midheaven. Good luck determining what really happened there. It's going to be very difficult. Extremely difficult. So now we've got the aftermath. Let me read you a couple stories. These are related to Syria. And they're pretty interesting. First of all, this is going to be an interesting detail to keep your eye on. And by the way, I still didn't see any kind of explosions or any carnage. I didn't see any carnage. Has anybody else? I saw a few, looks like fireballs across the sky. But other than that, I haven't really seen anything. I didn't see any cell phone coverage. I mean, I'm curious, putting that out there to people who are listening. This is from FARS, the FARS News Agency. And this is from Wednesday, April 11th. This was last week. Syrian army captures British military men in eastern Ghouta. A number of British military men were held captive by the Syrian army in eastern Ghouta of Damascus. Media reports disclosed on Wednesday saying they had infiltrated the region for the last month for a U.S. plot to attack Damascus in collaboration with terrorists and NATO forces that failed. The Arabic language Al Mayadeen news channel's correspondent in Moscow reported that a number of British forces had been captured during the military operations in eastern Ghouta. Earlier reports had disclosed last month that foreign military forces were deployed in eastern Ghouta of Damascus to launch a ground assault against Damascus in cooperation with the U.S. The U.S. and Israel plan to launch attacks on Damascus from several fronts in collaboration with the NATO and Jordan, but the plot failed after the Syrian army scored rapid major victories in eastern Ghouta. Now this sounds more like the truth. Informed sources disclosed that the U.S. and Israel intended to support the terrorists in eastern Ghouta by airstrikes so they could capture vast areas of Damascus to pave the ground for Syrian government's collapse. After the plot was disclosed, the Syrian Russian military commanders started operations in eastern Ghouta to repel it, the sources said. After the failure of the plot in March, the U.S. and Turkey sought to rescue the foreign militants trapped in eastern Ghouta of Damascus and take them to Idlib as they were facing the Syrian army's rapid advances in the region. After the army's expanding march in eastern Ghouta, the failure of the U.S.-Israeli plot to conduct an effective offensive on Damascus, the U.S. command center rushed in to evacuate allied militants and agents operating for Israel, Jordan, and NATO from the region. Informed sources then said that although Turkish officials said they were ready to help evacuation of al-Nusra Front, Tahrir al-Sham, Hayat, or the Levant Liberation Board, terrorists from eastern Ghouta to take them to Idlib, this seemed to be a cover as they really meant to rescue their special foreign forces that were among the ranks of the al-Qaeda-affiliated al-Nusra in Syria. Does that surprise anybody? Therefore, the U.S. has ordered Jaish al-Islam, Falak al-Rahman, and other terrorist groups to allow evacuation of civilians from eastern Ghouta to army-held regions in a bid to provide ground for these foreign agents to also leave Ghouta in disguise and enable Turkish intelligence network to send them to specified regions in Al-Tanf in northern Syria, which are under the control of U.S. troops. We're going to get into that. Yet the U.S. operations room in Al-Tanf base ordered end of all operations by the aforementioned Allied forces after the terrorists were defeated in eastern Ghouta and the collapse of two towns, Al-Nashbiya and Al-Mohammadiyya, in the final days of the Syrian army's offensives in eastern Ghouta. Also, the U.S. CENTCOM urged withdrawal of Allied forces from eastern Ghouta to Erebain, Zamaika, and Duma before leaving Ghouta into three areas to pave ground for the withdrawal from the Ghouta region. Militants allied to the U.S. troops in eastern Syria had revealed in March that the U.S. planned to stage an attack in a different region further to the east between the provinces of Homs and Deir ez-Zor. That's where they have the oil fields. So essentially what happened was that they were going to launch an offensive coming from the east, and it was a combination of all these ragtag militant terrorist groups, Fatah al-Rahman, Jaish al-Islam. So these are these little bands of terrorists that the United States and England and to some extent Israel train and arm, and then they infiltrate into those ranks. This is exactly what happens. So you have Americans and then you have the British, and they're fighting side by side. And then they got their asses kicked. and then the British got captured. Is that pretty clear? So you want to know what else is going on in Syria? Oh boy. Okay, so this is from a website called Friends of Syria. This comes from let's see, it was the 4th of April. So we're talking, 12 days ago. According to this website, 18,000 Syrian children have had their organs harvested over the last 6 years. I'll read this to you. Reports from the Director General of the Syrian Coroner's Office affirm that thousands of Syrian children have had their organs harvested since 2011. Turkish refugee camps on the border with Syria are identified as prime locations where organ harvesting has been and is occurring. Director General Hossein Neufel recently made the disclosure through the United Nations officials, though United Nations officials have not officially confirmed the findings. Previously, refugees have recounted horror stories about the dire situation inside some of the refugee camps. However, the morbid practice is not limited to camps, as there are claims that organ harvesting is occurring in urban centers as well. Speaking to the ARA News, Nadia Kamal, mother of an 8-year-old girl in the Al-Qadam neighborhood of Damascus, said, "My daughter Raghad had disappeared from a park in the neighborhood after failed attempts to find her in any hospital. I posted a notification online about her disappearance, but yet nobody responded. However, 10 days later, an unidentified person contacted me on the phone, saying my daughter is in good condition and I can receive her," she said, adding that the girl was handed over by a masked man. "Indeed, I received my daughter. However, impacts of a surgery were apparent on her body. After investigation by a doctor, we discovered that her kidney was removed." Muhammad Ali from Ruken al-Din neighborhood of Damascus told ARA News that more than 4 children were abducted in their area recently. There is also information emerging that ISIL forces are engaged in organ harvesting to help finance their military campaign. Furthermore, harvested organs are also said to be used to treat injured ISIS and ISIL soldiers. The Spanish daily El Mundo reported that facing the increased number of wounded members in the Syrian army and popular forces attacks, the ISIL is using the body organs of its captives for transplantation. Black market organ harvesting is a lucrative business, as there's high demand for the organs in international markets for transplantation. The price of a kidney or a heart can fetch anywhere from $15,000 to $200,000 USD, depending on the recipient and the country of destination. Accounts that organs were removed from the bodies of dead militants in the Iraqi city of Mosul have also been reported. This makes total sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you go back in time and you look at what they did with the dead, they would hack the dead up. If you were in a conflict or a battle, you would take and you would disembowel parts of the fallen and place them in other areas so that the person could not die intact. And if that sounds bizarre or insane, I mean, it actually has some, like, I would never do it, okay? Let's just be clear. I'm not condoning this. I put something up on Facebook the other day, and it was completely taken the wrong way. So I'm not condoning this practice. But if you understand that organs have memory, like our cellular memories in our organs, and then you have these organs dispersed all over the place after a battle has taken place, well, then how can somebody kind of intact over a period of time transition out of their organs? Because that's really what has to take place. When we pass away, the body should not even be moved for 3 days. This is really important because it takes at least 3 days for the entire process of the body or for the consciousness to remove itself from the cellular memory of the organs. Bottom line. So if you have these dismembered parts of the body, how's that person going to transition if they're spread out all over the place? I mean, I'm sure it actually happens at some point, but these people don't understand that, hey, we're going to mess you up now, and we're going to mess you up in your transition. So this relationship with dismembering and disemboweling has been going on for a long time. But now, apparently, they've got another agenda and a whole new market that's opened up. And this is not uncommon or unique. When there are disasters, world disasters, like an earthquake in Haiti or a hurricane in Puerto Rico, where there are large numbers of people who are injured or wounded. That's a lovely sound. What do you think happens in those situations? That's right, organs are harvested. All right, let me get into, there's another comment here in the chat room. QAnon has taken on aspects of a new religion. Followers, this is from Steve, followers are rabid because they have truth with a capital T. Yet, as you say, nothing has happened. Well, they argue about how traumatic revelation would be for the masses. Child trafficking continues. Maddening. Plus, if you bomb a chemical depot, doesn't that release toxic gas? Steve's got a great point. And again, if you want to bomb a chemical depot, all you've got to do is go in and send in some covert people. Take 3 or 4 people. Real simple. If you want to take care of that chemical depot, what do? You disrupt the distribution lines because they have to bring things into that factory or that plant. Correct? You just blow up the distribution lines. This is the one thing about the QAnon stuff. It's kind of it's become a new religion. And if you have a differing point of view, you're shouted down now. It's really interesting. It's like, I don't know, 6 years ago, I probably would have been breathing fire with the whole QAnon thing. But not anymore. Times they've changed. But the organ harvesting thing, getting back to that, that's prevalent. When there's a big disaster, there are people that show up very early on the scene to quote unquote help. I think we know what country I'm talking about. And what do you think they're doing? I don't really think they're helping. I think they're helping themselves. I think they're helping themselves to a smorgasbord of organs. They're there at the entrail smorgasbord. And their job is to quickly dispatch as many spare parts as possible. And then get them as quickly as they can into the organ replacement market. I mean, if technology, if there's one thing that Mrs. Martine Rothblatt can add to our experience, maybe it's the ability to grow and regrow our own organs so that we don't have to harvest the organs of children or fallen soldiers or the victims of some kind of disaster, in most cases, which are man-made for the most part. They would shut that market down. I would have to hold my nose and look the other way and agree with that. What a world we live in, huh? What a world. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens as this week unfolds, and where we are in Syria again, and the right and the left and the alt-right and the QAnons and the whole 9 yards. It's a complete movie. And the best thing that we can do is to sit back and try to stay cool and, again, get up every day and live our lives shake off the weekend, whatever happens, get back in your game, get back in the flow of your life and bring your essence, your creative essence, what you do to the world every day, and do it the best you can. Tether your camel first, then trust in God. That's my prescription. All right, let's get out of here. I'll be back tomorrow, 24 hours from today. Use your head to discern what's real and your heart to say what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix, and you've been listening to 15 Minutes of Flame.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality. We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.